Good evening, everybody. Thank you so much for being here. Welcome to ReactJS Girls number 30. This is our first ReactJS Girls meetup for the year. Everybody make some noise. Yes. So my name is Christine, and I'm excited to be here. I'm the community and content lead at YLD, and I'll be your host for this evening. So please raise your hand if you've attended a previous ReactJS Girls meetup. Very nice, familiar faces. Now raise your hand if this is your first ever meetup at ReactJS Girls. Welcome. We love new faces, we love new joiners. Welcome, welcome. Thank you for sharing your evening with us tonight. So to briefly share with you what this community is all about, especially for the new joiners, the newcomers, YLD created ReactJS Girls, this community, back in 2016. So 2016 was when React technology peaked or ramped up in terms of the popularity. And because community is at the center of what we do and how we work at YLD, we wanted to provide female engineers a safe and encouraging space to share their knowledge, engage with the designers as well, and just learn everything about React. So React may be very niche, but as it's technology, there is so much to learn. Everything is evolving all the time. So we just want to provide this community a good platform to learn from one another, share your experiences and how you tackle specific challenges, and just also connect with other engineers and designers, because who doesn't want more friends, right? Your network is a gift, and you have to keep building your network. So ReactJS Girls exists to help everyone in the community to gain new knowledge, and we would like to be helpful to you in your own career as a front-end engineer. Now, this is a rough guide on how the evening is going to turn out tonight. We will be starting the first talk promptly at 6:50. The talk will be kicked off by our lovely Giblett, followed by Nathalia for the second talk at 7:20. Then we will have a 10-minute break. I was going to say pizza, but we don't have pizza. It's a habit. Sandwiches, lovely sandwiches, mix and mingle. And then last but not least, the amazing Debora Ornellas will be kicking off the third talk at 8:30. And if you want to continue mingling, chatting, because it is an early night. The night is young, and so are we. We have a pub reservation literally 1 minute down the road at the Horse and Groom pub. The reservation is under YLD or Monzo, literally. We don't have a tab, so it's on you. But just letting you know, we do have a pub after party, I guess you'd say. Right, so there's a lot of information. There's a lot of information about ReactJS Girls, who YLD is. If you're interested to potentially give a talk as well in the future, you can register your interest. We have one QR code to rule them all. These are all the things that you can find on that QR code. And just wanted to highlight as well, if you are currently working on an interesting project, you're scaling up the product or scaling as a business in general, and you probably think, oh, it would be nice to actually collaborate with an external company like YLD. Hint, hint, just scan the code here. And also, we have a lot of job openings for both permanent and contractor roles, so be sure to check it out. So I've mentioned the word YLD, the company name YLD, and I just wanted to share a little bit of who we are as a company and what we do and why community matters to us. So apart from being the creator of ReactJS Girls, we are a fast-growing tech consultancy that tries to help our clients the best we can to strengthen their skills and their capabilities. And we do this by sharing our expertise across software development, product design, data science, machine learning, and AI. So YLD has worked with a diverse range of clients for over 10 years across publishing, healthcare, fintech, renewable energy, and to be honest, the industry list keeps growing, so I can't really keep track, but it is growing. So the community, as I mentioned, is at the heart of what we do and how we work, because as technology evolves, community meetups like this one, like ReactJS Girls, provides the underrepresented group in the technology industry a chance to share their ideas, learn best practices from one another, and find creative ways to solve challenges. So whether you're looking for mentorship among the audience or even from the speakers, if you want to approach them for mentorship, whether you are tackling specific work challenges or you just want advice, or if you also just want to build your public speaking skills and be our next speaker, this is a great space to take advantage of that. So now I'll hand over the mic to Tom Tinel of Monzo, as Monzo is one of our sponsor for tonight.
Thank you. Hello. Hi, everyone. It's good to have you back, We love hosting this event. So just wanted to give some housekeeping rules, okay? You got the toilets just over there. So you follow this corridor that's on the left. You've got in case of an emergency, you got the exits over there and over there. So just follow the signs. I'm not going to talk too much about Monzo. I think most people will know what we do, so we're back. But I'll say something. We are hiring for web engineers at the moment, so if you are interested to just have a chat, casual chat, I'll be hovering around there, around the sandwiches and the cakes, okay? So come and have a chat, okay? Enjoy.
Thank you, Tom. Okay. So before I hand over the mic to our first speaker, just a few reminders to keep your language clean. Don't think why you would swear at one another, but just putting it out there. Be kind to each other and don't share inappropriate content. If you have any questions, we highly encourage you to take advantage of, again, this community by engaging. Ask your questions in the Q&A session, which will happen right after each talk. And yeah, make the most out of the break as well to just chat with everyone you see. So our first talk for tonight, let me just give a quick intro. She is a UX researcher turned software developer that is now specializing in React and TypeScript. Her pivot from design to software engineering is made notable through her approach and passion in her work across every project she delivers. She's great at building user-friendly and performant interfaces during her 9-to-5 at Dunelm. And outside her work, she enjoys checking out the music festival scene, doing arts and crafts like sewing, and she also enjoys singing and DJing. I would have asked you to bring your turntables if I knew that. But maybe she could provide some nice tunes next time. Anyway, please welcome to the stage Emily Giblett of Dunelm.
Thank you. I was really feeling myself the day I wrote that intro, clearly. 1 second. Okay, let's do this. Hi, everybody. My name's Em. Thank you for the lovely intro, Christine. Today I'm going to be talking to you about undercover UX for developers, if I don't trip over this charging wire whilst I do that. So I'm going to give you some UX tips today to help you hopefully level up your developer workflow. To give you a bit of background on myself, I'm a software engineer at Dunelm. Dunelm, if you haven't heard of us, we're a leading homeware retailer in the UK. You might have visited our shops and maybe seen our adverts. Before I was a React developer, I was a UX designer, and I'm going to give you a little bit of an insight into that journey today. And when I'm not doing my day job, I'm hugging my cat. That's him there. His name's Oscar. He's 11 years old. Rescue your pets, people. And I'm also, dancing around at music festivals up and down the country. Can't wait till it's summer and I get to do that again. So, my working life so far, I actually did an English degree. So not a natural pathway into tech, but it's been very useful in terms of communication and lateral thinking and things like that. When I graduated, I did a tech grad scheme at Cancer Research UK, which was a rotational scheme that allowed me to try out different roles in different departments. So I did a bit of analytics, a bit of business analysis, but by the end, I was really sure that I wanted to focus in UX design and user research. I then moved on to another role in a different health charity called Welcome, and there I did another UX design role and user research role until I did a boot camp during COVID. And now I work at Dunelm, but I've also worked at a marketing agency and at ITV. So this is the kind of UX work that I was getting involved in those early roles. I worked on Cancer Research's donation platform, which is quite similar to Just Giving, except we don't give any money to Just Giving, we just use it for research. We also did UX research on a platform that helps you write your will online. And I also did some service design work for a volunteering program to help people talk to their friends about bowel cancer. In my Welcome research charity job, I did lots of research around newsletter workflows and also about sharing health research with policymakers and also the public. So there's lots of reasons to love UX design, and I did love my job for a long time, and I still am very fond of the UX as a discipline. I love speaking to people. I really love understanding different pain points and perspectives and hearing people's views on things. I find it really satisfying to design solutions and improve processes, and I just really love planning and running workshops. There's something about getting people in a room or a virtual room and like getting them to come together around a problem and find a solution. So there's lots to love there. However, lockdown got me thinking. I think it got a lot of us thinking, right? At this point, I want to introduce you to Pete. Pete is not a real person, but Pete is a cartoon I drew on Figma that represents my self-doubt and imposter syndrome. So if you notice Pete again throughout the process of this talk, I warmly encourage you to boo Pete. We don't like self-doubt. We don't like imposter syndrome. But I was really feeling self-doubt in my design role at the time. I felt especially out of my depth in design critiques. A lot of my peers around me had art backgrounds, and as I said, I studied English at uni, so I wasn't so comfortable standing in a design critique and telling people exactly why I chose this hex code of blue for this button, for example. One thing I was really enjoying, though, was working with developers. I was working on a back-end project at the time to sort of build an internal CMS tool, and I really enjoyed having conversations about data and logic and the flow of things. So, as often happens when you start thinking something, Instagram reads your mind, right? And you start getting adverts for the thing. And the thing for me was coding boot camps. So finally, around Christmas 2020, don't know what else was happening at the time, but I had like literally nothing to do. So the Instagram ads worked on me. And I finally decided to sign up to a boot camp. The boot camp that I did was with a company called LeWagon, and it was part-time, so I could do it in the evenings and the weekends around my job. And I don't know about you in 2020 and 2021, but I had very little to do in my evenings and weekends. There was not much we could do apart from Zoom quizzes, and I'm so done with Zoom quizzes. But my bootcamp was really interesting and exciting, actually. It was full stack, Ruby on Rails as the back-end languages, SQL for databases, and then HTML, CSS, and just vanilla JavaScript for front-end. We also learned quite a lot about like dev processes and workflows and how to work together and Git and things like that. And in our final group project, that's my group there, we made an app that talks to the Etsy API and basically allows you to save gift ideas for your friends, and then it reminds you to buy them 2 weeks before their birthday so that you can actually remember to buy them a good gift and not just forget like I often do. Sorry, friends. So at the end of that boot camp, I was like, right, yes, I want to go for this. I want to do this as my full-time job. So after a few months of multiple stage coding interviews and lots of coding tests, and I'm going to be honest, a fair amount of tears, I finally secured my junior dev job at a marketing agency. Now, this is me on my first day. They sent me a balloon. I was excited about that. I was very thrilled. But I was also excited about working with my team. They were super friendly, learning some new frameworks, Vue first and then React a bit later. And I was just really excited to get started building stuff. But I'm not going to lie to you, that first year really, there was a huge learning curve and it was really tough at times. And if I had a time machine and could go back and speak to my former self now, I'd tell her that I already had the tools to solve the problems that I was facing from my UX background. So the first thing that we do when, as UX designers, we think about different problems is we identify pain points. I'm going to talk about my pain points, but I'm first going to consult my emotional support water bottle for the hydration. Thank you. So, these were my key developer pain points at the time. I was really struggling with how much detail to share. Like, I'd come from the design background and I was really comfortable, although there was self-doubt there, but I was comfortable with talking about the designs that I'd created and talking to users and stuff like that. But in a technical setting, I wasn't sure, what do you want me to talk about when I present these ideas back to you or I present these solutions that I've built? I was also having really big mental blocks around showing people unfinished work. I often thought that it would kind of reflect on their opinion of me as a developer if I showed them something that wasn't quite finished yet. I was quite disorganized in my daily working processes. I hadn't quite figured out how to navigate life as a developer yet. And as I think we've all probably felt, I was really overwhelmed with everything that I had to learn. There's always new things to learn as a developer. And that's kind of the part of the beauty of it. But at some times I didn't think it was. So let's take these one by one and talk about that first pain point, which was how much detail to share. Now, if we're thinking about it as a UX designer, and starting to, let's, for example, say, build a landing page, one of the first questions you might ask yourself if you're building something as a UX designer is, what does my audience need to know? So what you're thinking about when you're first building something is focusing exactly on what your audience needs to know. And kind of that, asking yourself that question allows you to strip away anything that's superfluous, anything that's not going to matter in your design. And I think you can also apply this to when you're communicating as a developer. And I actually break it down into 3 questions when I'm thinking about how do I demo this feature, for example. So those questions are, who is my audience? What do they care about? And what do I want the outcome of this to be? Let's take some examples of how I might apply this to demoing a feature that I've built as an engineer. So, if the audience that I'm talking to is a product team, I think about who's in that product team, right? We've got product designers, we've got obviously a product manager, might have agile people, testers. Now I'm just listing people's jobs, right? But there's a lot of variation probably in the technical understanding and level of detail that those people need. And if I ask myself what they care about, the key thing for them is, what is the value of this feature? What is this value? What is the value that it's going to bring to the product as a whole? And what do I want the outcome to be? Well, I want everyone in that room or in that meeting to understand and agree on the benefits of that feature. Now, if I flip it and say, I'm going to demo a feature to my engineering colleagues, the answers to these questions are going to be different. So what they care about is, how is this feature built? And what I want the outcome of that scenario to be is the discussion of my technical approach, right? I want feedback on, have I made this as performant as possible? Have I made it as accessible as possible? So if I think about how I'm going to do those two separate demos, in the first example with the product team, I would spend quite a lot of time on the context around why this feature was needed. I would obviously demo the technical part of what I've built, but I would keep that high level enough for everybody to understand and be able to feed into the discussion. And then I would sum up with a clear indication of the value that this is going to bring, because I'm not necessarily going to be in the rooms advocating for that feature, but my product manager is, my product designer might be. In the engineering example, I want to give people context, but then take a lot of the time on the technical implementation, because that's where I want the feedback from those specific colleagues. And I want the discussion of the technical approach to be the key thing that we're focusing on. So if it's not as performant as it could be, if there is a bug that someone spotted, I want that feedback. So that's clearly where I need to focus. So asking myself this headline question, what does my audience need to know? And then these three questions underneath really helps me focus when I'm thinking about how to present my work back to the rest of my teams. I said you could boo, so thank you. That was great, guys. Okay, so my developer career so far has not been completely devoid of self-doubt. Pete has returned at this point, and it's because I had a real mental block, as I mentioned, about showing people unfinished work. I just, as I said, felt really insecure about it, and I thought maybe, if they see this pseudocode that I've written, they're going to think, idiot, why is she written it like that, right? That is a really negative mindset for me to have. And if I compare it to UX design, prototypes are a vital part of the process in UX, right? So if you think about your work in progress, sharing that with people, your prototypes in development could be anything, really. They could be like the flow of data just illustrated in a diagram on Miro. It could be a draft PR of like a proof of concept that you're thinking of or an approach that you're thinking of, and you want a bit of feedback on that. It could even be like pseudocode in a Slack message. But the key thing here to remember is you need to divorce yourself from like your worth being tied to your like work, essentially. Because sharing your work in progress early and often, it can lead to better collaboration. You usually get much more useful feedback because you're putting things in front of people and they have something tangible to feedback on. You can also spot issues a lot earlier in a lot of cases. So it's really handy, and I've learnt that along the way. So my next point, emotional water again. Thank you. My next point was around like disorganized daily working. And my answer, I think, to this one is to write code like it's for user research. What does that mean? When I was a user researcher, there were so many times where I was like violently humbled by creating a design, thinking it was perfect, thinking I'd thought through all the ways that a user could possibly interact with this. And then I would take it to a user research participation session, and I would be just humbled as like participant after participant would just rip it to shreds and find so many ways to teach me that I actually hadn't thought about every single thing and every single way that this could be misunderstood or go wrong. And that's absolutely not on them. Most of you will have heard the phrase, "you're not your user." I feel like it's really overused. Might have even been like engraved in some of my workplaces. But what that essentially means is like, you can never assume that somebody else that you're working with, whoever it is, has the same context in their head that you've got in your head. So this is essentially talking about how can I leave like little breadcrumbs, little clues around the work that I'm doing to make it as clear as possible to somebody else, like what I was trying to achieve. Or even not to somebody else, just to me in the future when I've completely forgotten what I was doing here in like 2 weeks' time when I come back from holiday. So an example here is semantic commit messages. I'm not going to make you put your hands up, but I've definitely been the person on the left, just kind of having a great time, building my feature or whatever, and coding away and committing and writing messages like fix bug, update stuff, work in progress. And that's fine. Like, you're fine at the time, you know what you're doing, but then are you going to find a bug if you have written commit messages like this? It's going to take you a really long time. You might have to use git bisect or something like that, and that's can be painful. Or you can use something on the left-hand side, which is what I'm trying to do now. It only takes me a few more seconds, and with semantic commit messages like that, I can see what I've done, where I've done it, and exactly what I've committed just there. And that's just one example of like, how can I do things around the code that I'm writing to leave clues for my future self? So there's some more examples here, not just semantic commit messages. Relevant and descriptive tests can really help someone quickly understand if they're reading your PR or, reading it and clearly understanding what you were trying to achieve and what this code is meant to be doing. Meaningful naming for variables and functions and classes. Breaking down the components you're writing into really small, focused parts. If you're writing comments, focusing on why and not the what, and then taking maybe like 5 or 10 minutes extra to write a detailed PR description. Because remember, like, somebody who's reviewing your code, you want to get the best review, not best in terms of like the greatest feedback, but like the most in-depth and useful feedback that you can when you're sharing your code with your teammates. So if there are quirks of the repo or decisions you've made or logic that you've put in a certain order because of a certain reason, share that reason. Take a few minutes extra to share that detail in the PR description. It can really help you get much more useful, detailed feedback. And that last point. So I was overwhelmed with everything to learn. I think when I first started, I was trying to learn Vue when I first started, and I would sit in front of these video tutorials that were like 2 hours long, and I would watch the first 15 minutes, lose concentration, and then spend the next 15 minutes after that probably just beating myself up about how bad my concentration was and how bad my lack of information retention was. But if I think about it in terms of user research again, I'd never sit down next to a participant and say, like, well, everyone else can learn like this, so you must be an idiot. But that's what I was telling myself. And that's obviously a terrible way to talk to yourself. That's not going to mentally help you become a better developer, Emily. So what I've tried to do is treat myself like the own user in my own learning, I guess. So some examples here. I'm currently studying for my AWS Cloud Practitioner certificate, and I found a platform that does 5-minute maximum videos, and they also sum it up at the end, so there's no fear of my poor information retention skills getting in the way. I'm also using Notion to organize my notes, and then because I've organized my notes really neatly, satisfyingly to my brain. It's really easy to port them over into something like Jungle AI, which allows me to make quizzes and flashcards and really easily revise. So this is a very specific example of something that I've implemented in my learning. And I'm not saying this works for everyone in every situation. I'm by no means saying that. However, what I'm doing by encouraging you to think about this, I guess, is to think about how you learn best and incorporate that into what you need to learn. So especially now, I think, with Gen AI tools that we have at our fingertips, like Notebook LLM, if you're needing to read a really dense piece of documentation, could you feed it into there and turn it into a podcast and go on a walk and listen to it and retain that information a little better like that? We have all these tools at our fingertips now, and I feel like it's a really good opportunity to use them to kind of put things in the format that you need in order to drink them in best and learn them best. And I hope that thinking about putting yourself in the middle of your own learning again will have good impacts for your self-esteem like it has for mine. So just to go back over those 4 UX tips for your dev job, what does my audience need to know? Always ask yourself that question. It really helps you focus on what you need to communicate. Share your work in progress early and often. It's not a reflection on your worth. It's just going to help you in your working life. Write code like it's for research. Think about the clues that you can leave around what you're doing to help you, your future self, and other people in your team. And make sure to center yourself in your own learning and think about what you need to learn best. So thank you, everyone, for listening to my talk.
Thank you, Em, for the very insightful piece. Thank you for sharing how you do your way of learning, your best practices. Does anyone have any questions? Well, I'm going to warm us up. So I'm going to ask the first question.
Sure.
Have you found yourself acting as a bridge between design and development teams?
Yeah, like all the time. It's funny, we were just talking, Debora and I, before the talk about how it's really, really amazing when you have a designer that you work really well with. I think that's really rare, but the main thing that I always find especially in projects where I've kind of made real efforts to improve the communication between designers and developers, is it really just simply comes down to talking to each other more. You can put all of the tools in place and tools and softwares that you want in terms of communicating, but the best thing really is to just chat frequently between designers and developers, and that could be a lot better.
Great, thank you.
Thanks.
Anyone? Great.
Hello, thank you so much. My question was about when you talked about abstracting information for product owners versus engineers when you're demoing, but have you ever found instances where you have both of those audiences plus senior stakeholders in a room and you have to kind of go about kind of churning the information out in different ways? Because I've had that sometimes and it's quite difficult to layer that in different audiences within one room.
Yeah, thank you. That's a really good question. I think that at that point, I would kind of step back and say, what is the purpose of this meeting? I think that's the thing I think on a daily basis in pretty much every meeting. But yeah, what is the intended purpose of this meeting? And if it is to kind of give updates, sure, there's going to be senior engineers, tech leads, principals, whoever in the room. And I'm going to obviously make it clear that there's a level of technical understanding that I've put into the work that I'm doing. But again, at that point, if it's an update to all of the stakeholders in a team, the thing that I would come back to in that scenario is still, it's probably that I need to communicate the value of what I've built and how that thing that I've built is going to make things maybe more accessible, more performant, or more people are going to check out when they have something in their basket or something like that. So I think, yeah, at that point, you can kind of lean on the intent of the scenario you're in and be like, what do I need to share based on that? Thank you for the question.
I think we'll have just one more. Anyone? Well, I have one more.
Sure.
So I can appreciate that maybe some of you or one of you in the audience is transitioning or a beginner. So it would be nice to know from you, what resources did you find most helpful in your transition to being a developer?
Ooh, a good question. Honestly, my transition to being a developer, as you've heard, was not easy at times, but I was really, really lucky to have a really great team around me. And in fact, like some people in this room were in my first team and actually started on the same day as me. Hi, Harry. Harry's great. So find your people at work. And I've learned so much from you and just like talking and collaborating with you. So it was great to have someone. But if you can't find someone in your workplace to do that, I think communities like this are amazing to network and find your people and learn from them.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Em.
No worries.
One second, guys. Tech transitions, you know how it's like. Oh, here, you can plug it.
Should be fine. This will turn down right in the middle.
Right. Great. So, well, our second speaker is already next to me, but I will give you a quick introduction anyway. So she is the co-founder of a company called Custodian, which is a company that provides a fintech platform to help users manage their physical assets, starting with specialist cars and insurance. So aside from co-founding this company, she has also created the app Metos.app, which is a tool for writers to support the creative writing process. And she is an active member of various tech communities, in fact. And this is where she met one of her closest friends at hackathons. And recently, she won a prize at an AI consumer hackathon with her husband. Talk about the dream team, power couple. And finally, she also dabbles in creative coding and digital art. So please welcome to the stage Nathalia Roos.
Hello? Yeah, nice, thanks. Okay, let me charge this. 'Cause imagine if I'm in the middle of the talk and suddenly my computer just dies. All right. Can you see this? No? Mm-hmm. Yeah. See, this works again. Let me know when you see something. Oh yeah, nice, cool. All right. So the talk title is quite ambitious. Behind the curtain, how Next.js works. All right. I don't think there's a single talk that can cover all of that in 20 minutes. Okay. I think you would need 8 hours. So I guess the title is more to show you the perspective that I have on things. Is trying to understand, okay, what does it do for us that you may not realize when you're using Next.js? And stuff that I wish I had known before. And the reason why I had to learn this personally was when I started Custodian, it was in 2019. And at the time, people were hesitating between React.js and Next.js, and now it's Next.js by default, right? But at the time when Next.js came out, the impression that I had and that a lot of other people had was that it was only just doing like server-side rendering, which is a lot, right? But like I had my homepage for my startup in another stack, which had perfect SEO. And then my actual app was all under authentication. And so I was there like, there's no need for me to have Next.js really. I can just do it in React. There's no SEO needs. Everything is behind like a private authorization. But then over time, Next.js became a powerhouse, and it gave you so much more than just server-side rendering that it's absolutely crazy to not just use it, right? And then it became the default. So understanding why it's actually like an amazing new tool that we have. I'm seeing a lot on Twitter of criticism around Next.js because of how complex it became. But I think that you have to really appreciate the complexity behind, so that you understand if you have to move tool, you understand what you're trading it for, right? And a lot of what I learned over time about Next.js, I realized that a lot of people didn't realize it, especially when I was working with junior developers. They were doing some stuff that looked bizarre. And then they said, yeah, online, I could see that I could use like dynamic imports of components and stuff like that. And I'm like, you know, that it does that for you automatically, right? You don't need to do it. And they said, really? I said, yeah. So yeah, just to make sure that everyone can appreciate what it does. Not all of it, of course, I don't have time, but some of it. So intro, technical overview on Next.js, it will be very fast. Core concept of code splitting in Next.js. Babel, the role of transpiling in Next.js. Webpack versus TurboPack. Next.js shift to Rust-based bundler. That's super important if you're doing any work for upgrading your code base or working on previous versions of Next.js. There are a lot of radical differences, and you need to understand all those nuances when you're doing your configs. And if you're doing your configs wrong, you will see a lot of errors. So yeah, understanding that will save you time if you ever do run into those errors when you're upgrading or changing between different versions of the code base. SWC, again, the evolution from Babel to Rust-based compiler, optimized asset handling from images to fonts, and then we'll go through advanced caching and prefetching strategies, and then conclusion. I only have 20 minutes, so I'm probably going to go shallowly into certain things, and I'll stop on things which I think are interesting and that I did not know when I started with Next.js and that I think are underappreciated. So again, just to make sure we're on the same page, the number one thing that you're thinking when you think of Next.js is static side generation, server-side rendering, okay? The focus is on optimized performance, developer experience, and flexibility. For those who are not exactly sure what's the difference between the two, static side generation means that it's basically pre-built, okay? So before your user hits the browser, the code was already compiled, okay, at build time, once, that's it. And then it stays like that until you build it again, if you do a new deploy or stuff like that. And even then, with caching, it depends. Server-side rendering means that it's on demand. Before you hit the browser page, you have it already ready for you, but it's still fresh content. Every single time that you request it, it builds it, okay? So it is slightly slower. It may sound like it's not great for SEO because it is building it on every request, but it's actually amazing for SEO because it is still built it in the server, which means that the web crawlers on Google will be able to get to the content. Okay, you don't need to have it loading on a browser for it. It's already there. Cool. So again, as I said, it evolved and it added so much stuff over time. It's crazy. It's amazing. For example, incremental static regeneration, you have so much more flexibility over how you want to do things. So incremental static regeneration, for example, is when you want to have something like the static side generation. So like on build just once. However, you can set an interval of times in which it will redo the build for you. So it's amazing. It's super fast. And at the same time, you can have fresh content on the interval that you want. So for example, if you have a blog post, which is live every day or every week or something like that, you can say, okay, you're basically going to redo a build every week or every day on an interval, and then it's blazing fast. Okay, then you have React server components that have been added, which are amazing, edge functions, the new app browser, etc. So the first thing about what's behind the curtain that I thought super interesting is the concept of code splitting that it does for you automatically, okay? So that you know that it does it for you. The amazing thing about the code splitting thing is that it divides your application into smaller chunks. Okay, so I gave all the talks in the past about atomic design. And the principle of atomic design is that you basically are making your app like a sort of puzzle where you have reusable buttons, reusable templates, reusable organisms, basically, hence atomic design. You think like a scientific person when you code. And Next.js is kind of like the same concept for code splitting in that it basically makes your app like little building pieces, and it only uses the pieces that it needs to be assembled for every single page, which means that when a user goes on your page, it doesn't load the entire code base that you have. It basically only knows what exactly is needed for this specifically page to be bundled, okay? Which means that when a user goes on your page, it's much faster because it doesn't need all of the stuff. It knows what is needed, which is something that a lot of people say, oh, just use React jQuery or something like that instead of Next.js. It's much simpler. Like, sure, you can do it and it will look the same, but you don't realize that if you do an e-commerce website, for example, like milliseconds means that someone is going to buy your stuff 60% more likely. So you are losing all of that stuff. So again, like the browser only loads the necessary code for the current page. And that cannot be understated how important that is. Now, this is where a lot of people make mistakes. Okay, they go online and they see that Next.js gives you the capability to create bundled pieces of your code. And you can use dynamic components to do exactly that. Now, this is fine and this is great, but it does that for you automatically for every single page. Okay, so just because it's interesting that you can do it if you want to, and you can see how it works in the source code. If you look in the source code, and we can look at it if you want, and if we have time at the end of the talk, you can see in the Next.js repository the dynamic component function, and you can understand how actually it's the same way as they do it themselves for your pages. So it's good to know that it's there, and it's good to know that you can use it, but I've seen some junior developers using it, but you don't really need it. Just because you can do, you should have your own dynamic imports for every component. There are too many small chunks in total. It can basically, every single time that you have a dynamically loaded component, it makes an HTTP request, which can actually make it slower. Okay, and also it could interfere with Next.js built-in optimizations already. So again, when you look at tutorials, it's good for you to know what Next.js does under the hood, because then you know, okay, that's not really necessary. It makes things worse. Okay, so just be aware of things. And also, it can mess up with the SEO because each component basically could result in incomplete page during SSR, because you're interfering again with how your code was bundled before, and you have so many little different separate pieces that it makes it confusing for the web crawlers. Every single time the dynamic component, important component is needed, the browser must fetch that chunk of JavaScript, which can add latency. So be careful with that again. I think I've covered that. Yeah, the nice thing about code splitting as well is that Next.js doesn't just do that on the initial page. All right. Every single time that as a user you are navigating between different pages of the application, it does exactly the same for everything that the user can see. So it's not just on initial load, it has a code splitting experience as far as the user is concerned for all of the other rest of the navigation in the application, which is really powerful. Now, this is where it adds layer over time, and this is amazing, and how Next.js keeps evolving. It makes so much sense. So you already have this, which is super fast compared to all the other platforms. And then suddenly they release the app router, which I absolutely love. And what they have automatically for you is if you have a page called loading.js or TSX, right, if you use TypeScript, they have integrated with React Suspense, which you could use before on your own. But again, they've just added layers over time, and you can see it in their new versions, how it just keeps on building on top of each other. They already had an amazing system. And what they did is, okay, well, when there are some pages, even when we code split, it may still take some time. When I say time, like milliseconds, all right? And so we don't want to block the main threads. We still want to be able to do what's super fast. The things that take longer, that's fine. We're going to lazy load the components, which means showing like little skeletons if you want, or loaders and stuff like that. And so they added that in the new version, and it's automatically used with the new app order. It's a really good experience. So I urge people to upgrade their Next.js apps because I know that it's been only like 1-2 years that this has been in, and a lot of code bases would be older. But that saves you a lot of code boilerplate. And it's just literally like in that loading.js file, and then every single time that something is loading, when the user loads on the page, you can see a nice skeletons as you want, whatever you want on that. It's really nice. So yeah, when used together with dynamic imports, this can further improve performance by not blocking the main thread while waiting for the code to load. Cool, so that was code splitting. So now you know what it does under the hood. And if you see in a tutorial to use dynamic component, you're warned. Now, Babel SWC, the raw transpiling Next.js, why is that important? Again, I had made a code upgrade for my code base where I've changed the versions, and I've seen a lot of errors about Babel and SWC, and not understanding what it was just made me waste time. So I was like, okay, let's read about that. Why is that important, and why can't they work together? It's one or the other, okay? So Next.js used Babel to transpile code, okay? So does React with CRA, by the way. It's not specific to Next.js. What it does is that it permits you to use the new ECMAScript features, so for example, the arrow functions and stuff like that, to be able to work through all of the browsers, okay? So Babel is not a bundler, okay? Its sole purpose is to transform the modern JavaScript or TypeScript into a backward compatible version that can run on all browsers, okay? So it is pretty needed, and as you can see, like you have default configurations for you in the older versions. But the problem of it, though, is that it does slow the build times, especially in larger projects, and I've seen that with Custodian. At first, it was super fast, and then I added a marketplace, and then I added an insurance system, and then I added this and that. And as a developer, you could see how, like, whenever time I was making a change and it was rebuilding the app on my terminal, it was taking some time. And I remember when I was making the upgrade of Next.js, suddenly things went so much faster. As a developer experience, it was incredible, the difference. And so, yeah, Next.js had made an upgrade from Babel to use SWC called Speedy Web Compiler. And this is, again, why it's interesting for you to know, because when you're upgrading Next.js from the previous versions, you will want to use it, and you will have to change the configs files and everything. So read about that if you're going to do that. Just know about it, because then you'll see a lot of errors. You don't know where it's coming from. So the reason why, again, it became looking for alternatives was because of how slow it was. And then SWC was Rust-based, all right? And Rust is amazing. Let's have a look at the difference between Rust and JavaScript. It's good for you in general to know. Rust is used a lot these days. It has gone to slow down a bit in the recent few weeks, but Rust is used for AI a lot. It is super, super performant. We are using at Custodian Golang, but I was looking at Rust and I was like, oh, that's cool. But yeah, as you can see, the difference between Rust and JavaScript is pretty, like, it's pretty incredible. It typically outperforms JavaScript by several orders of magnitude due to low-level control over memory and CPU usage. So it goes basically much lower on a much lower level, which takes way less time. And yeah, it has a built-in support, especially for concurrency and parallelism using threads. So without data races, and you can do multiple threads at the same time, and JavaScript can't. So again, what that means is not just for the user, again, but that's as a developer experience. When you're going to make changes in your code, it reflects these changes like almost instantly. It's crazy. It's amazing. Yeah, startup time, same, like you can take pictures if you want, but the difference between Rust and JavaScript is amazing. Now they've done the same for Webpack. All right, so let's see what Webpack is. So it is, when we talked about code splitting, Webpack is basically one of the things that allows Next.js to do the code splitting. This is like kind of like, you can think of it like the engine behind the code splitting, what makes it possible. Okay, all the configs we can see in the source code of Next.js later, they have like a Webpack config file, and you can see how they make the configurations for the code splitting there. So as you can imagine, it is a very important essential part of Next.js, and it was the default bundler in Next.js, and it basically has been, again, similarly to Babel to SWC, it has been replaced by TurboPack, which is again based in Rust. Okay, so when you are upgrading your version of Next.js, or if you're using an older version of Next.js, this is going to be super important because you have very much different configs, and you can have errors based on how incompatible things are, how things are now incompatible with how it was before. So it's good to know. Okay, so this is again faster build, similar to the previous one. You have instant feedback. Okay, every single time you're making a change to your application, you can see the result and the change in your build. It's incredible. Let's try parallelization. That's the same for Babel and SWC as well, because it's using Rust, right? Let's have a look again for the differences. You can see this table here. Yeah, it is pretty amazing. I'm going to skip there because we have a lot of things to go through. So how do this all fit together, right? So WC first passes the source code, okay, and it generates an abstract syntax tree, which is how your code has been basically made from JavaScript, ECMAScript to something that can be read by all of the browsers, okay? And it basically parses your code super fast. Once that AST is generated, SWC performs transformations based on the configuration. So this is your configurations that you have in TurboPack or Webpack, right? And then after the transformation, SWC generates the final output as a bundled JavaScript file that can be run by the browser. If you're using TypeScript, SWC will remove type annotations during this phase. So you know how everyone is using TypeScript these days, and I absolutely love it. At the end of the day, when it gets bundled together, you don't have any of the TypeScript. It's completely removed. TypeScript is just for you as a developer. Okay. So yeah, and then it integrates with Webpack and or TurboPack. So when used with Webpack, SWC, which is compatible with it, is configured as a loader to handle JS, JSX, TS, and TSX files, right? It can replace Babel in most use cases. So in the meantime, when I was upgrading my Next.js code base, I was using SWC with Webpack. And then so you can do it, okay, as a stepstone. Then with TurboPack, SWC is also integrated directly into the building pipeline. So it speeds up the build process while performing the same transformations that it did, okay? So SWC now is enabled by default. So again, that's important for you when you go to older code bases, which you will in most companies, you will see the differences. Another thing of how Next.js works under the hood is how they optimize the assets, right? There are some things in here that is pretty unique to Vercel. So in Next.js with Vercel, especially if you're hosted with Vercel, it does a lot of things for you. So something which you may underappreciate is images. I don't think you realize how heavy they are and how slower it can be on an e-commerce website or something like that if you don't have it. Next.js automatically for you does image sizing, which means that the image component makes it so that it resizes the image automatically based on the device viewport size and resolution, which is pretty cool. And it automatically serves the images in the appropriate size, ensuring that images are not necessarily unnecessarily large, okay, for smaller screens of devices. Let's say, for example, that you're on your mobile phone. It's a very different experience than if you're on an ultra wide, okay? If you're on an ultra wide, then we have like a marketplace with cars, right? I don't think you understand how much the resolution even costs you money. Like we have so many, we have terabytes of images being served every month. And if we had the high resolution images on the phones of people, I think our bill would be so much freaking higher. It's crazy. So I'm pretty grateful that it does that for me. Because then even if you make the mistake, and even if you're not doing a careful job of making sure that it doesn't use the high resolution images and whatever, if you completely mess up, for you, it has your back. Okay, so that's pretty good, because then if your website goes viral and whatever, your bill will keep being low. So again, that's something that another tool may not give that for you. They're also lazy loaded by default, which is pretty cool. So they are only loaded when they come into view onto the user screen. So again, you save a lot of bandwidth, storage as well in general on your browser's memory, which means that it's faster for the user because it doesn't get all of the images in the cache that you need. It's just the ones that you are using. So it's pretty incredible. It also automatically optimized the images for in the sense that on the format, so it has the WebP format, which is way more efficient than the traditional formats that you have, like JPEG, or in PNG and so on. So again, it supports that for you. And it basically generates multiple versions of each image during the build process and only serves the appropriate version based on the request. So it does so much for you out of the box, and you may not appreciate that again. So when you're looking at different alternatives for your front end, do know your trade-offs. Font is pretty cool. So did you know that when you load a page, it only loads the character sets needed for that page? All right, which is, again, like, fonts are incredibly heavy, and I did not realize that. And I even changed some designs when I went crazy with the fonts, and I was like, okay, it's so much prettier if we use like 4 different fonts in very subtle ways, and it creates a really cool UI. And I was like, okay, and then I did it, and I saw the difference in load time. I said, oh, that's why everyone just skips like to one font, because the difference is crazy. But even if you do keep your app to only one font or 2 fonts, it's the sort of thing that you just never think of it, but it takes so much time to load compared to relative to other things, even relative to images. So yeah, the fact that it only includes the character sets needed for the page is actually pretty cool. It does that for you. And also you have to use Google Fonts. Like, sure, if you have very specific edgy needs of a specific font, go for it. But if you're like most people, just make sure you're using a Google Fonts, because it does so much for you if you're using one of the Google fonts. It has a library for it. And I don't think you understand the pain that you could go through in terms of performance if you don't use that, and if you don't have something like Next.js for you to optimize it super nicely. So yeah, again, I'm sure you've been familiar with that. You can basically have different ways of showing the font when it's loading, which again, you don't think it matters, but there've been so many studies on, especially on e-commerce, because e-commerce are a very good study for you to understand the impact of performance on a user's brain, because e-commerce is very simple. It's, do they buy stuff, yes or no, immediately, like when they're on the session, right? And the impact of when something looks nice straight away, like in the closest millisecond possible to the user, the impact of that you don't even realize yourself as a user that it has on your brain in terms of the actions that you take and the first impressions that you have of the product is insane. Absolutely insane. So it may seem not important for you to have the thought of how does the font look like when it's loading if I can't even see it being loaded because it's so instant. Your brain sees it. It's freaky, okay? You don't need to have seen yourself, like remembered yourself the font being loaded so that it looks nice when it's loaded. Like your brain sees it. So you can look online at super cool research about that. So again, take the effort to set up the font that you want to show when it's loading. You can with Next.js. It's pretty cool. You can't with a lot of other platforms. So know about that and use it. Yeah, again, you can self-host your fonts. I would not. I would again use a Google font for sure. But if you want to, again, it will just load the characters that you need for that page. So it's still better than using another tool which doesn't do that. Cool. So yeah. Next.js as well, and especially if you are using Vercel to deploy your app, it basically serves the assets from the nearest location to the user, which reduces latency and improves load times. Again, all this stuff that you don't think of, which makes your user so much different in behavior on your app. It basically also caches static assets. They were generated during the build process with unique hashes in their file names. And I saw that because I was trying to reuse some images that I had on my app for my mobile app. And I was like, I don't want to use like an S3 bucket because they already are on the web on my public directory. So I'm just going to reuse my Next.js like public directory URL from that. But I was struggling because I could only find pictures with the hashes in the URL. And then the hash could change at any time, like within the next month. And so And I was wondering, and then eventually I did use the public URL from the public directory, but I Googled and was like, what is those hashes added in the URL of the image? And so I didn't even know that they were doing that. But yeah, this is what the hash is. It basically makes sure that it is cached, and then when the user goes on your website again, if they use the same browser, or even not, if they just use the same location, it will be blatant fast. Again, something that it was doing for me, I didn't even realize. We can go. So when I was telling you about how it caches for you, what they do under the hood, basically, they are just adding caching headers where the max age is this, which is the max age possible. So it's something that you recognize, because I'm sure you're using cache on your own code, and there's nothing magical about it. It's literally just the same thing as you would cache something yourself manually in your code base, which is pretty cool when you look at Next.js source code, and which is a massive black box for most people. But when you're looking at the source code and if you understand the concept of what they are doing, and then you read the source code, some functions then make sense. And you're like, oh, this is like normal code. That's cool. I can read Next.js source code. Just knowing about it is pretty cool to just learn for yourself as well. And if you're into open source and stuff like that, you understand those things. Next.js again, how does it do the caching, right? So during the build process, the pages are pre-rendered and saved as static HTML file in the .next directory. So when you're doing a build yourself, a pn run build, if you're curious, have a look at each of these files. And it's pretty cool how you see your code being completely transpiled to something completely different. It's a very dense file, and you can see how it is all compressed. And you can also see it when you're on the browser and you inspect the code, and you go to, I think it's called source or assets, I can't remember, I think source, and you go into the pages that it's being used to be able to see on the browser. If you visit that, you'll understand how it does the code splitting. You will see your code splits, and it's pretty fascinating to see, honestly. Something that you can do if you want to, again, it's pretty cool that you can do that if you want to, is having in the middleware, you can basically set a caching policy for each and specific route, okay, which is pretty cool. So let's say, again, it will depend on your needs, right? If you don't have a page that changes often and you have authentication, for example, you can have it so that you cache this specific API route. Is it this route? Sorry, I'm just checking. Yeah, sorry, this is the API route that you can cache, which I discovered recently, and it's pretty cool. You can basically say, okay, I want to get the authenticated user every 5 minutes, right? So you can cache it for 5 minutes, and then it can perform a lot of actions that you need, and it doesn't need to check whether the user is authenticated or whatever. And 5 minutes later, it can say, okay, revalidate, recheck, right? So you can handle things like that for things like, the token or stuff like that, if you want to, on the server side. So it's good to know that you have so much flexibility over how you want to do things, right? And then it can look like it's very complex, but the thing is, you only need to use what you need to use. I feel like people feel like Next.js is complex because they think it's absolutely needed for you to do all these middlewares and stuff like that. You don't need to do that. As I've shown to you, a lot of the stuff is done for you automatically. You just don't know about it. So when you look at the documentation in all these edge cases where they show you all of the powers, a lot of people are freaked out and they're like, oh, am I supposed to cache myself every API route? Or they think that they're not doing it correctly if they don't do it because they just can't be bothered. But no, all of that stuff is so that when you have an edge case or when you have a bug or when you have something very specific that you need to build, you are able to do it exactly the way that you wanted. But if you don't, that's completely fine. The rest is still very much taken care of for you. Okay, let's go back to this. So again, I've seen a lot of developers asking the questions around what they need to do for the client-side caching. And again, you don't need to overdo it because as we've seen, it does a lot of things for you already. But what people are using is use SWR, okay? But you need to know the difference, the pros and cons and whether it's even needed, right? So this is a table to show you the different the different use cases for client-side caching. So the caching that you're doing yourself on the client side. So it depends again, like if you need state and hooks for local data management, then use it. Just basically don't try to use it for things that you don't need to use it for, like the server component things. I've seen some code on some tutorials on like some Medium blogs when I was making research actually for that talk. I was trying to understand where people got it wrong. And I saw some people keeping the data that they had received from an API into like a local state, and then using that object kept in the local state for their for the rest of their pages and the rest of the components. Like, you don't need to do that. And they probably thought that it would be making sure that it doesn't make the request again or stuff like that. But that's not how it works. You should use the local state management only for things that are purely on the client side. Like, I don't know, keeping track of the scroll position. If you were to do an animation when the person scrolls down the page, yeah, then you use like a local state management. I'm not even sure that would need to be cached. Like, this is just, unless if you want to make sure that when they go back to the page, you catch their last position on scroll to be able to do some return animation on there. But as far as data is concerned, if you're using a React server components, you don't need yourself to use something like client-side caching. I mean, you could, but the benefits there would not be as much as if you were not using REST server components. Do you see what I mean? Like, yeah, when you understand what it does for you, suddenly you may realize that a lot of the things that you were using or libraries that you were using are actually not really needed. Like, the benefit is not that much. So I would say use client-side optimizations. Maximize it for the UI effects rather than for the data. And if you really do want to be performant for the data, I would say upgrade your Next.js and use React server components. That would do so much more than any optimization you want to do on the client side. So we've seen that. That's cool. Yeah, so again, a lot of people get quite confused for when to use SSG. And it is true that if you have an application, by default, you're using a lot of the user data, and therefore it's not really useful. But every single company does have normally some kind of like user constant pages like FAQ, blog post documentation, product pages, so where, you know, it doesn't change with every request. So do use that. It's absolutely amazing for SEO. And again, ISR is something that people are not yet super aware of. They only know about SSG or SSR. ISR, again, is pretty cool, and you should check it out. You basically have, it's exactly like SSG, basically, but you're allowed to set an interval for when you want it to be rebuilt, which is, again, pretty cool if you have content that changes every day or every week or something like that, and you want absolutely amazing performance. But again, don't use any of these two if you're doing super user specific or highly dynamic data, like a dashboard or like user recommendations. Like, I have a marketplace with car recommendations, and I would never have used that for that, because it depends on the users who you absolutely don't want to cache that. So yeah, let me check if that's going to be more helpful than what we've covered. I'm running out of time. Yeah, this is also a good, I think that's a pretty good table if you want to take a picture of that, for the difference between SSG, ISR, server-side caching, middleware, and edge functions. A lot of people mix them up, and understanding the edge case for each will make it easier for you to debug and just, in general, have a good performance. Yeah, I'm waiting for you to be done taking pictures. Yeah, cool. So, conclusion, we've covered the shift to Rust-based tools, which again is super important when you're doing any upgrade work or when you're going back to an older code base to understand any errors and different configs. We've understood, how Next.js evolved, right, from server-first rendering as a central focus to doing much more than that and optimizing so much more for you having good performance in general, scenarios for different caching needs. I suppose if you wanted to look at what Next.js will do next, this is only my guess. My guess is that they will focus on edge computing, so having stuff really close to your user so that there's very little latency. further integration with Rust for developer tools especially. Catching and prefetching, there's so much more that they can do. And again, I think that it's a bit unfair on them because they're going to release all of this stuff and then get the criticism that it's getting too complex. But people don't need to use that. It's only you use it if you want to. And if you need to, at least you have it. And yeah, developer experience improvements for even better tooling. I would say it would be pretty cool to have a tool where when you're inspecting your own code, it automatically has like a different, maybe not a different color, but it does tell you on the top, like this has use client, or this is a server component, or this is a client component. It would be great because I keep switching between code base and inspector to try to understand when I'm reviewing code, to try to understand or debug when there's a problem. And if I didn't have to do that, and if it would be obvious when this is server rendered or client side or whatever, it would just make a big difference. So if everyone is at Next.js and hears this, hi. And yeah, I hope this was helpful. Or if you're upgrading Next.js or looking at different reasons to upgrade Next.js, it made you think about that.
Thank you so much, Nathalia. That was a lot of information to cover.
Yeah, sorry.
But we actually still have a bit of time for Q&A.
Good.
Here, thank you so much for the question.
Thank you. I have a question because you mentioned so many things why Next.js is so great. Can you tell from your perspective of using Next.js, is there anything that you don't like about Next.js?
Yeah, the learning curve is great if you have a team who is aligned. Okay, so because again, as I've said, you have so many different ways of caching. You have so many different ways of doing things. Different ways of having the loading.js, for example, file, as opposed to having your own React.suspense in the page and stuff like that. It does make it super complicated with a team to be aligned. There's so many different ways of doing something, and it can be wrong, right? And then they can say, oh yeah, I've read the documentation, and it said this, and then I read a blog, and it said this. There's also a lot of not misinformation out there, but a lot of tutorials where it feels like it's relevant to you, and then actually in your specific use case, it makes performance worse, right? So it's a great tool if you are strict with your engineers, in the sense that you all understand what is your use case, you understand how you're going to do the caching, you all understand the do's and don'ts of each particular thing, so that you don't have bugs. And sometimes it's hard, especially when you're in a startup, because you have to move fast and you have to ship. Sometimes it's like, okay, well, are we just going to use like a simpler tool, because then at least things will get aligned. So I would say that is the down, right? Is if you have a team that you need to micromanage, it probably will be problematic. But if you train your team well, and if you have regular meeting with them to explain things, or have them explain you something on the different concepts of Next.js, so that you make sure that they understand the logic behind it, then I think it's great. But yeah, the communication, I would say, is the problem, or potential communications problems based on that.
Thank you.
Yeah. Does anyone else? Here. Yes.
Thanks. Yeah, I was just trying to Google some stuff, because bear in mind, I know Next Vue.js, so I don't. So as of today, is it possible to do edge side rendering? Like, when you have an app like with heavy geolocation features, that you have to pinpoint the locations, and you need the edge rendering, because in Next is possible. Does it really work in Next.js? I don't quite. I'm trying to Google it.
I haven't worked with Next.js. Like NU, it's the one which is NUX or whatever.
Yeah, exactly. In Next, it's possible.
Yeah.
Is it possible in Next?
I'm not sure. I don't want to compare with Next because I haven't used it, so I wouldn't be able to make like a proper comparison between the two, right? I think Next.js, I think they're working on it for sure. I think there's been a pretty early beta versions of it in the last year. Everyone is talking about the next version of React, and people have been delaying it for months. I think it's been released now, but I think it's still in beta. So if it's not now, if you say that it's not now on par with Next, I would bet all my money that it will be this year or next year, because the team is working on edge computing pretty intensely at the moment.
Okay. Okay.
Yeah, so I think it will be. It will be for sure. I think there's no doubt on that. It's just a question of when, if it's not like that already.
Okay. Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you so much. Well, we have literally 2 minutes, and then we break off for more sandwiches and socializing.
It's a very small question. So you were talking a lot about edge computing, right? Is that related to the hosted version like Vercel or something, not the local, like our own deployment, right?
Yeah, so I'm using Vercel, and I think it will probably work better with Vercel. I would be surprised if it works completely perfectly with no bugs on other platforms. Personally, that's my personal opinion. Okay, don't cancel me. But I think Next.js makes a lot of sense for Vercel for that reason. Like you don't have to worry about whether it works fine or not. Like I've been picking Vercel for 4 years now, and it was perfect for the new versions of Next.js. It was all ready for it. So I would not be able to answer your questions on the other platforms, how it works with it, because I didn't take the risk of using it. I have doubts about it. That's why I kept on Vercel. And that is the criticism that a lot of people had with Next.js, is that you have the vendor lock-in, because then you have to use Vercel and you can't easily get out of it, which is another con, I think, of your question as well, a very relevant one, actually, is that, and based on the fact that Vercel is a private company, and it has the whole pricing potential monopoly on in the future. Yeah, I would say this is not a red flag at all, because Vercel is completely fine so far, but it is a concern if you're not using Vercel. Will this work as expected? And I don't think it's a given at all. And they are saying themselves that you should use Vercel because he has all of it. So yeah, I don't know whether that answers your question, but I guess it could validate your doubts at least.
The reason I asked is I work for a fintech company,
yeah,
which handles extremely sensitive data.
Oh, so you had sensitive data. You said, okay, so Vercel is good for sensitive data, as in it has all the best practices. It's all on you. Okay, so if you're not careful with reading the documentation on how to name your variables and stuff like that, it can be very specific. If you are following the documentation exactly as the documentation tells you to, and sometimes it's not obvious, okay? Sometimes you have to really search for it online and look at a subpage of a subpage of a subpage of the subpage, which has the very important explanation, okay? Kind of like AWS. I can't blame them. It's the same. But if that's your worry, the fact that there's sensitive data, if you're doing it correctly, there's no problem. And there hasn't been any breach. And my co-founder actually had an email thread with the founder of Next.js about that, because we're an insurance company, right? And he even talked with one of the head of the cybersecurity and stuff like that. And we understood that should not be an issue. Yeah.
Well, thank you so much, Nathalia, for covering such great ground. Thank you, everyone, for your questions. To kick off our third and final speaker for tonight, a bit of an introduction about Debora. She is no stranger to ReactJS Girls or to the YLD community. She gave a talk a while back when she was working at Lego. She gave a talk at our Design Systems London Meetup, which is a sister community, pardon me. So she is a front-end engineer who is passionate about design systems and well-written documentation. She builds and maintains websites that drive growth by making social payments easier at Monzo. Before joining Monzo, as I mentioned, she worked for the Lego Group, where she gained a lot of experience building a React shopper design system. And when she is not working her 9-to-5, she enjoys making art by drawing and photography and a bit of karaoke. So, which is an art form, I think, especially singing in the shower. So please welcome to the stage, Debora Ornellas. Do you need to?
Yes, thank you.
All right. Hi, everyone. I hope you had a nice break because we're going to be talking about buttons, everything button related for 25 minutes. So I hope you enjoy. I don't know if anyone here is as passionate about like buttons and other web components as me. It's fine if you are not, but I feel like as front-end developers and React developers, we do interact with buttons whether we want or not. Buttons are everywhere. So some of us might make them or might have made them in a previous life, as I did, if we are in a design system team or close to a design system team. I would be bold and say that we all consume them in our day-to-day lives, whether it's because it's a third-party component library that we do go and consume, or because a sister team of ours has, like, it's a design system team or a component library team, and then we consume that internal components. And we are all internet users, so we do interact with buttons every day in our apps, in our when interacting with desktop applications or on mobile phones. Anyway, I got the screenshot from Instagram. We do have to do some gov.uk things every now and then. So, okay. So for this presentation, I wanted to prepare not only from my previous experience, but also from looking at what most design systems, like open design systems, are doing in terms of their buttons. And I use this amazing resource. I do recommend, I will mention it again at the end of the talk, but the component gallery is amazing. And it's a place that compiles all of the available open source documentation, not necessarily open source, but open documentation for design systems, such as the Pinterest one, Microsoft, Twilio, Shopify, eBay, and other libraries such as Chakra, etc. And then, as I said, in my previous life as the Lego Group developer, I spent 2 years working on a design system. Unfortunately, it's not open, so I can't really I would love to share the storybook if I could, but it's not open. But I used to tell people, people would ask, what do you do for work? And I would say, I built the button in the lego.com website. And I would be very proud of that. And I still am, because the button is still there. So if we answer the question, what's in a button, we can start by the basics with an HTML element. Because most React components, in the end, they are a wrapper, of course, of styling and logic over HTML component. And in 99% of the cases, this component should be a button. Native HTML button component. I'm not going to say that 99% of the buttons that you're going to inspect in the web are going to be buttons, but they should be. You're going to find inputs, you're going to find spans, divs, and other things, maybe if people are creative. But they should be ideally buttons, because you get for free a lot of things. You get for free the semantic meaning, the keyboard navigation, the fact that you can activate them with enter or space keys, the less styling work required to make it look like a button, because it already is a button. And also you can put a lot of things as children, and you get support for icons and other elements, rather than comparing with an input component as a button that only supports text. And then the first tip that I would share is to let the native attributes shine. I guess this is mostly if you build buttons, but this is also something to notice if you consume buttons. If you try to add a type as a prop in a button, and the type actually is primary, secondary, tertiary, this is wrong. This is not ideal, because the native type of a button should be one of those three, which is especially important if you are building a form. And in general, you should almost make sure that the buttons you consume or create extend the native attributes of the button with, I share the interface if you're using TypeScript. Because you're gonna get all of the nice attributes that come with the default button for free. Another tip, like this is a big topic. It might be a bit controversial, but like nowadays, lots of links look like buttons. Some buttons look like links. It's very hard to know what to use. With Next.js and the fact that you can import, like use router and then do a router navigation through an on-click, it's very easy to use a button for everything. And it's, yeah, I don't want to, like, I don't know, it's very hard to have like a definite rule of thumb, but I just wanted to give like some basic guidance that may help like coming with to like hopefully like nice conclusion for most of the cases. So first rule is like, does my action happen on the same page? So let's say I click on a button and then it opens a model, or I click on a button and submits a form data, or it makes an API call. Anyway, most probably it's going to be a button. Does my action consist entirely of taking the user to a new page, be it internal or external? So for instance, it happens a lot. You have a next or a back button, and or like a let's go or shop now. But this action, even though it still happens on the same app, the only thing it does is taking the user to a new page. And sometimes you can think, okay, it's a button, and then the on-click does router.push something, something, but ideally should be a link. And the third one would be a bit more complex. It happens sometimes that you do have you click a button and the action has a side effect. It does something on the page and has a side effect that ends up taking a user to a new page. I would say that it's okay to be a button because it's a side effect. It's not the only action. But I mean, I'm happy for people to disagree on the Q&A, and that's fine. Let's learn together. What's in a button? Content. First thing, text. Text is one of the most important things that you can have in a button, maybe the most important thing. And it does give like meaning to what the action to be performed is going to be. And some things to think about, like I would say text should be ideally the responsibility of the consumer. So it should be our responsibility, like everyone here consumes buttons, so it is our responsibility. Some things in my experience that I've seen going a bit wrong is like translation, because sometimes, I don't know, like it happened in my previous experience to either hard code text in components, or like don't think about translation keys or where should the translation happen. And then in the end, you have to migrate a lot of places at the same time when your app scales. It's always good not necessarily to over-engineer, but to consider, okay, one day my app might go viral and need to be translated into all languages that exist. And speaking of this, text overflow is usually something that happens when you when you translate into different languages. It did happen a lot with Lego.com that, we only had a very limited space for the button content, and then German did like mess it up all the time because it didn't fit. It didn't fit into the space, but we didn't think about this because we were thinking about the English words all of the time. And it's good to think about, like, should we have a character limit? Should we overflow the text with ellipses? But what if we need to know all of the content at some point? Should it grow horizontally? Should it grow into different lines? I don't know. There's no like guaranteed response. It's just about let's always think about it. And then in terms of ARIA label, one thing that I see some people doing it's well-intentioned, but it's not necessarily the correct way of thinking about accessibility. It's like, I want to make a component accessible, then I'm going to slap an ARIA label on it. In terms of a button, by default, you might not need an ARIA label on a button. I will come to an exception to this rule, because the text might give enough meaning to what the button is going to do. But again, like, it's nice to always give the option for the consumer to set. I don't think we should say, okay, we don't need an ARIA label because the text is going to be enough. And then icons. I think, like Nathalia said in her talk, like in e-commerce, there are like some things make a lot of difference, even though we don't really believe or we don't really think that it's going to make a difference. And icons in buttons do make users click on them more. Like, I don't think necessarily all of the time, but it does make a difference sometimes to have a shopping bag in an add to cart button, or we all came to be to associate the heart icon as add to favorites. So it does save a lot of space. So if you see like the search icon, the microphone, like the record button, it does really help with understanding visually what the action is going to be. And usually we see a lot of icon left, like in most or all of the design systems that I looked for this talk, they had at least the icon left and the icon only option. And some buttons also accept for you to put an icon after. And here it comes like a topic, I don't know how also controversial this is, but I tend to find that design system developers prefer this way of doing things, and consumers prefer this way of doing things, where you can, where like the first type is the consumer decides what's inside the button. So if you want to put 4 icons inside a button, it's okay, because you might want to for some reason. Nice, Duolingo. I didn't do mine yet. I need to. And the second one is like, I have tight control over what my button can and cannot do. The problem with the second one, which I used to be like firmly in favor of, and now I think it really depends, is that first you need to be careful when you create your props, so you don't end up with lots of object props that are not ideal for performance. So you need to ensure that all your props are primitives, so you can end up with actually like, I don't know, 20 different props for doing things that are quite simple. I don't know, it's really a matter about, again, collaborating with design and understanding how tightly controlled the visual identity needs to be. Is it okay if someone like misuses the children? It might be okay, it might be just a matter of conversation and like collaboration. I don't know, I just wanted to bring this up because some buttons are different and you're gonna find both styles. Yeah, about ARIA labels. This one, icon-only buttons must have a meaningful ARIA label. This is one of the things that are always caught on accessibility audits for a good reason, because although we can mostly see that, okay, this is probably an alert, I don't really know, I don't remember anymore where I screenshotted this from. People who are using assistive technologies will not have any idea of what this is for if you don't give a meaningful ARIA label that explains what it does. The ARIA label tag also needs to be translated if you have an international app. So this is something that sometimes we forget and only put the ARIA labels in English. And then for enforcing the ARIA label, I've seen this being done with TypeScript or linting rules, if possible. Okay, what's in a button? Interactive states. I feel like we've all seen like buttons that we hover over or click and nothing happens visually, and we don't really know like what's going on. Like, did it work? Did it not work? And sometimes it is because the development team at some point like didn't really put like different visual indications of you hovering over, activating the button, or focusing on it. And it is really important. Like, I would say the focus visible is the most important for accessibility, but in general, like all of those different states do give a better sense of like your website actually working and being performant, because you hover over it and you saw how it changed. This is one of the tips that I don't know, I was like, am I the only person in the world that didn't know about this? But hopefully I am not. So yeah, if you want to force a button state, on Google Chrome, I think in other browsers as well, I think I tested this in other browsers, you can click this hov button that opens a submenu where you can force, for instance, the active state of an element, so you don't need to actually be clicking on it to see how it looks like, and you can change the colors, etc. So this is very, very useful, not only for buttons, but all sorts of components. Another tip is if you don't know which colors to use for hover, focus visible, active, etc., and you just want something that is effective and works, you can use the darken or lighten function. So you take the background color that the default button already has and just make it a tad darker for each type of action. Okay, next one is disabled. So usually what disabled prop in a React button does is it passes over the disable attribute to the button. And it's okay for most of the time. It prevents clicks, focus. It has some styling associated with it. So for instance, the not allowed cursor. And it's accessible. It has semantic meaning. However, it doesn't mean it's the ideal thing to do for all buttons all the time, because it prevents focus. And there is a really nice article from CSS Tricks that I read once, and I'm like, oh, I love it. And I try to implement it as often as I can, which is about a possibility for making buttons more accessible, disabled buttons more accessible, which would be, rather than using the disabled native attribute, would be using aria disabled of true or false. It does not stop the on-click action, so you would need to stop the on-click action with JavaScript. So it requires more work. It can be a bit brittle if you don't test it, but it would be nice. So in this example that I really like, the button is disabled because you haven't done the correct action, which is adding more tickets, but a user who are relying on keyboard navigation to actually understand what's going on can never find this button. How will they know what they need to do? So with the second option, which is making the keyboard accessible, like the button accessible by a keyboard, then you can use also a hover action if you are using the mouse, but at least it's going to read the add to cart text, and it's going to read it's disabled because you have aria disabled set to true. And what the author of this article says, when I found it quite interesting as well, is that sometimes the most accessible option is to not make the button disabled at all and just make it always clickable, but give the indication of why the action wasn't performed as an error message. I found that quite useful. I don't know, again, it depends on the usage, but something to keep in mind. Quickly, some buttons can be considered to be toggle buttons. This example I got from the Y aria pattern guide. So toggle buttons, it means like you click, you change the state of the button, so it can be on or off. And it's important to use the aria pressed attribute. So again, very important, if your button has the native button attributes, you can just pass it at props. You don't need the third-party button to have added as a custom attribute. And then finally, the final state that I wanted to mention is the loading state. And the difference between this and all of the other states is that this is logic driven. It's not native. There's no native indicator of, okay, this button is loaded. So it's up to the consumer to set up the loading state and to pass it on as a prop. And it's up to the React developers who created the button to say, okay, actually there's going to be a spinner, and I'm going to do the spinner this time, etc. So it might feel like, okay, this might be much trouble, like it's not worth it, but it is worth it, especially for users with slow internet connection and or for actions that take a long time, or they are extremely important. So I don't know, you're finishing a purchase, etc. Sometimes we are using our apps in our very fast internet connections in the office or at home, and we're like, this is really fast, I don't need a loading button. And then you try again to demo your app to your friend, and you're like, with your bad pub connection, and you're like, oh, why is this not loading as fast as I wanted to? Anyway, and then disable the button while it's loading to avoid some of the race condition problems that we might have. Some more aria attributes that might be useful. Aria Live indicates to an assistive technology user that this element, this button might change. So it might become loading at some point. And then aria busy is the one that you're going to use to say it's loading, it's not loading. So those might be useful depending on how important this button is on a page. And then I guess the final point, like what's in the button? A visual identity that differentiates your button from other apps. Why does it matter? You might have seen this before, or if not, a really invested Reddit user compiled all the different buttons of the Steam gaming platform, and like not only the buttons, but I only selected the buttons, and it's incredible. Like it looks like 50 different companies, but it's just the Steam buttons. And I mean, yeah. You're not Steam, like you don't have like the almost monopoly of, like most people do not work on a company with the monopoly of your domain. So you might want your buttons to be unique and represent your company and be consistent, so users know what to expect when they are performing actions on the website. And we can see, like I selected a couple of gov.uk buttons. They are very recognizable. And on the left-hand side, it was some Apple buttons as well, and they have the visual identity. They are quite recognizable as well. And what makes a button unique is usually typography, spacing, border, and colors. And you're gonna find like most buttons are going to have some variants. Some of the common ones that I found or have used before or said before is like primary, secondary, tertiary, goals, transparent, outline, negative, etc., like sizes, full width. And I don't know, this is really like each design system has their own needs. Like not all of these are necessary, but I just had like 2 final tips on this section. Like this one might be most useful if you have more control over a button, but it might be like as well as a general warning. Some of the most common sources of accessibility color check fails are between like background colors and font color, like text colors that look accessible but are not. So for instance, at Lego, the Lego group, we had to accept a wide range of colors as background colors, but we wanted to ensure that it's the button component who picks the text color. And this ensures accessibility at all points. So it's either black or white, but it's the button who controls. So this is something to keep in mind if you have the control. And in general, like less might be more. In our like teams, in our specific applications, we might say, okay, this button that's already available doesn't really fit what I need. Let me expand it a little bit. And those things end up causing more complexity. Like the more variants we have, the more complex the button is, the more complex to maintain, and the less consistent the user experience across the platform will be. So yeah, if you or your team need to make a change to an existing button or like component as a whole to match a specific functionality, think, will this break other people's usages? Can I extend this component and just build something like my component that extends the existing one, so I don't need to modify it for everyone? Or can I just use what's already available? And maybe, of course, it will be a bit more limited, but it will be very consistent overall. So yeah, so this is just to say I brushed over, like I didn't go too deep into components that use buttons as part of them. So accordions, menu buttons, drop-down menus, button groups, stepper, those are all like more complex components that are not native. So you won't find any specific replacement outside of like form, especially because you have selects, but drop-down menus usually are not used inside forms, etc. And buttons have specific, you're gonna find like all the native attributes that are gonna be helpful in this case, but I don't have time for this, unfortunately, today. So what to do with all of this info? So hopefully at least like something in this talk has been useful for you. So if you found this useful, then this is a gentle invite to revisit your usages on your day-to-day of buttons, see if they match the accessibility and visual requirements that they could or should, and then you can contribute with improvements. If you are closer to a design system team or part of a design system team, then it's easier, but maybe you could extend like a third-party component and just apply those improvements, and then at least you're gonna be able to build like a mix and match of things that work better for everyone. And as an internet user, this is an invitation for us to like pay attention to what we're using, seeing what is well made, what is not as much, maybe inspecting things, and whenever possible, submitting feedback. Because if we can like make the web a better place for everyone, it's it's part of our job, right? In the end, and just. To finish, to go back on, recommend the resources. My favorite resources for web development are the component gallery, the Y area offering practices guide. It's amazing with a lot of practical examples for accessibility for almost everything that you can imagine. CSS tricks for articles and MDN docs for everything web related. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Debora. That was very, I love how you explained it very simplistically and good engagement, really. Like, that was very insightful. We have room for like 3 questions or so. Okay.
Just a few days back, I was working with a friend of mine, and she asked me, should we make the logo of the website clickable? Is it not intuitive that that's the home button? Well, I said no. You do need a logo. You do need a home button to make it obvious. But then we found out that there's actually a very popular running. I found a Reddit chain debating about the usability of a home button and a logo. Just quickly want to know what's your opinion on that, because just stumbled upon a topic which is specifically on buttons.
So just to clarify, it's about like logos being like the logo of a page being the button. Yeah. I would say it's a great opportunity to be a link, so an anchor tag, because the purpose of the logo, sometimes I've seen it working like in different ways. So for instance, in some of the Monzo websites, the logo goes to a different website, which is like, oh, you are in a sub-page of Monzo, but then when you click on the Monzo logo, you go to the Monzo.com marketing website. This is most definitely like 100% link. But even if you are just taking people to the homepage back again, it's again like the full purpose of the action when someone clicks the link, it's to go to a different page. And yeah, so it was really nice. I was talking like just before this talk with, was this Sarah? Yeah, like, and she was saying, if you want to open in a different tab, then it's most probably a link. So think like on-click actions, you can't really like ask to open it in a different tab. If you want to open it in a different tab for some reason, then it's a link. Does it make sense? Does it answer your question? So it's okay to be clickable, but not as a button, as a link component. Anchor, yeah.
Yes.
Great talk. Thank you. You mentioned building button components for a big website such as Lego. So I imagine a lot of users would be using it from mobile devices still, even though we're in mobile app era. So have you got any gotchas for making buttons mobile friendly? And maybe specifically around the way users click on them or press on them, rather?
That's a really good question. So one thing, I guess, interesting fact is, I think it probably is okay to share this, like 70% of the usage of the website was on mobile, but like most purchases were still on desktop because people still feel like, oh, it's safer to go to desktop. But it's a really good point. I would say a couple of things that sometimes we think desktop first and should be mobile first are about font sizes. Especially, like, it's really nice to do fluid typography, but it's important to ensure that the minimum font size is still like large enough that people can click. Like with different thumb sizes, they can like actually like go and click. So both in terms of like fluid padding or buttons, and something when I was researching, one of the first talks I ever gave was about mobile web mobile accessibility or like app mobile accessibility as well. And something that was mentioned is making sure you have, I don't know, this is not fully just for buttons, but like making sure you have non-clickable space between things so people cannot accidentally clicking on things when they just want to scroll. So it's important to leave enough space that it's not like people will want to scroll, people will like to go back. Like it's very important for not everything to be clickable, so you're not in a mess where you're like, oh my God, I accidentally clicked to go to this page, I have to go back and start from scratch. But yeah, overall, the hover, hover is not that practical, but the active visual change when you press a button is still very important for mobile because it does work. When you press with touch as well, it does work.
Just one more question. Yes, sir.
Hi, very nicely done presentation, I mean. My question was, I think it's more or less connected with the person actually, the last person who asked the question, okay? That yes, indeed, we do use, we are using or even designing mobile, like sites, like websites nowadays for mobile phones as such, okay? And not maybe that much for desktops. But the thing is, you see, if I were to bring the conversation more towards the accessibility side of things, okay, especially as you said that what's in a button, right? Okay, so I'm sure, as you know, that for example, there is a quite wide sort of population out there, especially with the visual issues, okay, or visually impaired people. Yes, I mean the thing is they might be able to use it, but at the end of the day, they can't use it like organically. Right, if I could say that. So instead, for example, they've got to really, let's say, for example, like myself, okay, sometimes even if I visit any sort of websites, okay, I sometimes see that the actual UI for any sort of buttons, okay, they tend to be a little bit quite vague or even not really clearly designed. Don't you think we should go towards that?
Yeah, no, I definitely. I guess it wasn't like fully, it was a comment, but I definitely agree, like in terms of we sometimes don't really think about, like we rely too much on visual clues and like context clues that don't make sense in terms of like the structure of the app. Like if we were to remove all of the CSS or the JavaScript, like it wouldn't make a sense and the page wouldn't make sense in a like HTML hierarchy or semantic point of view. So it is always like those challenges are very those are challenges that like I face when I worked on a design system team. Like it makes you think a lot about like how the web should work ideally, like or like the idea of progressive enhancement and making sure that everything works, even when you remove almost everything. You remove JavaScript, you remove CSS, and the page should still make sense. Of course, it's very difficult when you're building complex e-commerce websites or other like applications, but I don't know, I guess my goal with this talk is not really like, oh, everyone is in a design system team and should care as much about buttons, but it's more about, okay, as React developers, we're very close to the end user, and it's nice to think a bit about the basics and try to not like see buttons and all the components less as like React abstractions and more about like HTML with a bit of magic sprinkled all over it, but we still have to make it work as much as possible just with the basics. Yeah, hope it makes sense.
Everybody give a round of applause to Debora. So the night has ended. And before we go, just wanted to say a few thank yous. So thank you again to Monzo for sponsoring this evening's meetup and sharing this amazing space with the community. It's very spacious, very nice, very comfortable. Thank you as well to the YLD team who are here for organizing the event and putting so much effort into making it happen, and for just helping engage as well with the community members, especially the new ones that joined us tonight. Thank you to our speakers, Nathalia, and Debora, for your insightful talks and for elaborating on your respective topics during the Q&A especially. And finally, again, thank you to the audience, all of you, for showing up tonight, for staying, and for spending part of your evening with us. We highly encourage that you stay in touch on socials. So this QR code, it does say, we are always looking for speakers and sponsors. We try to provide a space for female engineers to take the stage, but the audience, again, is open to people of all genders, every engineer of all levels as well. So thank you again for joining us. See you at the Horse and Groom Pub if you still want to continue the chat, have a drink just to unwind, loosen up the nerves before heading home. And please, just stay in touch. Follow us on LinkedIn and X if you're using X still.